telling stories and leverage technology to tell those stories, but understanding that fundamentally the story is more important than the technology, right? Like what you're trying to do, what you're trying to show, what you're trying to tell is more important than how you do it. When you come at it from that perspective, it allows you to kind of experiment with how to tell it, right? Like, is it better to build a CG thing? Is it better to do a model? Is it better to do a puppet? Like, whatever the heck it is, whatever tells the story best. And I think that that fundamentally is the perspective that, at least for me, that I'm trying to bring into our innovation space, which is like worry less about the technology and worry more about the value, worry more about what you're able to create in the world. And if that's Web3, great. And if that's Web2, fine. Like, it doesn't really matter.
Welcome back to MetaRick, where we talk about emerging technologies like the blockchain, the metaverse, and artificial intelligence. Today, I'm super excited to have Mo Husseini and Eric Arvai. I'm really hoping I pronounced those right. Should have asked before we started.
Nailed it.
But super excited to have you guys on today. Founders of GenCity Labs, a company working in Web3 with technology as well as with creative services. And one of the things I'm really excited to learn more about is your perspective on community forward marketing. I had a chance to listen to you guys talk on LinkedIn the other day about this topic, and I think that will be very interesting. But before we get into it, I always like to keep these conversations really free flowing, and I want to start by just learning a little bit about your story, give the listener some context for kind of what you do in the industry, and a little bit about your background. So maybe we'll start with Eric and then kick over to Mo. Just tell us a little bit about your background and how you started with GenCity.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate you having me on, Ricky. It's a pleasure to be here. So I got started in blockchain Web3 in around 2018 or so through a friend, mentor of mine, who actually was one of the original founders of kind of our native Web3 NFT community, Frontierverse Non-Fungible Heroes. Before that, it was a collection called The Boring Bananas. So he sort of mentored me through this insanity of wallets and private public key pairs and seed phrases. And, as I think you and Mo both know, there are some serious UX issues in all of blockchain and Web3, and I think that's certainly hindering mass adoption. So I'm just sort of a bit of a self-learner. I kind of dive into geeky, fun, new technology. I've always sort of done that. I have a background in production, for video, filmmaking, instructional design as well. I used to work at UC Berkeley up at the Electrical Engineering and Computer Sciences department as an instructional designer producer. So I've been around smart people, much smarter than me, most of my career, which has been fun for me to have the ability to learn from so many great mentors. So I got involved in Web3 through this mentor. That company evolved into what is now GenCity Labs, and so I've been working full-time as head of strategy since last May. So it's been a little under a year. Before that, I was contracting with them. So I'll kick it over to Mo for his much more impressive intro.
You are clearly mistaken, my friend. Let's see, where do we start? My background is film and television. Many years ago, I started out in independent documentaries. Actually, when I was at Berkeley, studying as an undergrad, I ended up working in documentaries. That led me on kind of a crazy. I guess the way I compare. The best analogy to my career is pinball. I keep bouncing off things into other things, and it's been a wild ride. So I started in documentary film. I ended up in visual effects. I worked for George Lucas's Industrial Light and Magic for many years, and went from there into commercial directing. Went from there into helping craft films for live events, went from there into helping build the kind of corporate strategies and what you today might call content strategy, but back then didn't really have that kind of name. Ended up in live events, I would say for the last kind of 15, 20 years of my career. The last gig I had was over at Freeman, which is one of the biggest event companies in the world, and that's where I met Mike Shaman, who is the CEO of GCL. After I left Freeman, Mike had reached out to engage me as an advisor on GCL, which I loved doing, and after a few months of doing that, I actually really wanted to be involved in the company, which is where I came on as a chief design officer late last year. So I've been here since kind of November, December of last year. My kind of philosophical take on things in general is a little bit different. I'm not much of an evangelist for anything. I tend to kind of come at things from there's a great quote that I've always kind of used to describe my perspective on things, and that is, I'm an optimist who takes an umbrella. I like to think that the best is going to happen, but I always make plans that, the worst might happen. And really kind of that's my approach to everything. So I tend to ask a lot of what I call stupid questions, right? Like the questions that a lot of people forget, which are often very basic. I think I'm incredibly bullish on Web3. I think Web3 is categorically the future of the web. I just don't think that it's being kind of rolled out in the right kinds of ways. I think it's too complicated right now in terms of the average user. And I'm not talking about, people who are willing to kind of jump in and understand things. I'm talking about, your mother-in-law, right? Like your uncle, right? Like people who are kind of going to engage with this technology. It can, I think, as a function of a lot of the language that we have in the space and a lot of the ways that we talk about stuff, it can be very off-putting and feel very complicated. And so, when people don't fully understand what you're trying to do, their general reaction is like, I'll wait, right? And I think my perspective on what I want GCL to be focused on is really creating a confusion-free on-ramp into Web3, right? Like a way that gets people into Web3 so that they can experience the benefits and understand the values very quickly without having to kind of run through a bunch of math around what the heck's a wallet? Why do I have to sign? I already signed. Like, what are you taking money? Like all of these questions that kind of freak people out if they don't know what's going on. And, the FTC stuff and all that stuff that's been happening in the popular culture, I think makes people very wary of the space in general. I think there's a ton of conflation and a ton of FUD. But we're pretty convinced like this is the way forward, right? It's more about figuring out the right ways to get that in front of people and engage them with the technology in the right kinds of ways. And boy, did I go sideways on that question.
No, I love it. I love it, Mo. And that perspective that you just shared is like one of the main reasons I want you guys on the show. I've had a chance to hear you guys speak a couple times at the XR Pub Crawl with Lisa and Billy, and this LinkedIn Live just the other day. I'm having my coffee on my porch, and I see you guys are on there. I'm like, let's check these guys out, see what they're chatting about. And I hear that perspective coming from you guys. Like you're obviously believers in Web3. You're obviously deep in it. Like you have your own NFT project that you guys have kicked off and launched. You do this for other brands and help them with their activations. Like you're obviously about it. But I think you're one of the few companies that's about it, but coming at it from a really pragmatic lens of trying to be realistic about like, okay, why is this going to work? Why is this something brands should adopt? And if the brand should adopt it, how should they go about it for their brand in a unique way that's going to make sense? And I think that's important when brands are looking and thinking about partners to go at this. They need to make sure that they're not partners that are just hyped up and founded a company last year because they thought it was exciting. They need folks like you that are more pragmatic about it. There's a few things I want to highlight from your intros that stood out to me. One of them is I thought it was really cool to hear that you both started as contractors / advisors and then decided to come full-time at Gen City afterwards. I think that's a really cool sign about the culture of a business. And I'm curious to kind of get your take on like what made you want to follow through on kind of sticking around after, like if there was like a moment in that process. But the other thing I want to highlight real quick before you answer that is I'm noticing this trend of like everybody in Web3 or in the metaverse or even a lot of the stuff going on with generative AI, so many creative people. Like I've had a few, and I don't know if it's just my network and the type of people that I'm attracted to bringing on for the conversation, but Nate Essen has a film background, Tyler Gillespie has a film background, other folks that haven't been on the pod, like Nolan Ether has a film background. Like so many people either come from big production events or from film production and storytelling, and then they're just geeky about technology and like, how do I apply these creative skills to tech? So it's really cool to hear you both come from some form of that kind of creative world too. But anyways, like to get back to that question, like what made you say like, hey, like I'm done advising, I want to be here, like I want to be a part of this business?
I'll let the handsome guy go first.
Oh, you're looking in the mirror?
I also love this, by the way. Like here,
only one of us looks like they walked out of a catalog.
I've never heard you guys talk solo. I've always heard you guys go to these things as a team, and you guys are so good at hyping each other up and these kind of like. It's a cool culture.
A wingman, you know, someone that's gonna talk you up. You can't do it yourself. So before I get into that, I wanted to actually touch on what you had said about, you know, so many artists and creative folks in the space. It's funny, just this morning I was up early and I just shared a post on Twitter and LinkedIn. I just find it fascinating. New technologies tend to be adopted first by creative people. You know, I just feel like there is a curiosity, there is an openness to play, there is a sort of not a fearlessness, but you know, the willingness to fail, and that sort of a philosophy with creation, because creation is a vulnerable thing. You know, you're making something new and putting it out in the world, and you're subject to judgment, and there's something about that where, you know, with NFTs, you know, the technology has been adopted first by visual artists, digital visual artists, and another sort of a side point to that, you know, before NFTs and digital art kind of, you know, created this last big wave of sort of this big cycle that we just experienced, this sort of bull run in crypto and NFTs. Music and musicians, digital music, you know, had a far greater footprint on our culture than visual art, which was sort of, you know, sort of traditionally cornered to like physical art, right? Obviously, there's been digital art and digital artists. It just hasn't had the same kind of wave of adoption that music has with streaming services. And now I think with NFTs, where you have a simple software that encapsulates the ownership of a digital thing, a digital asset, you have the ability for visual artists to kind of, you know, take a little bit of that market share, take a little bit of the mind share of, I think, you know, just culture in general. And I find that fascinating that a lot of the folks that are building in the space, I think, come from, you know, as you said, Ricky, like the folks you had mentioned on your podcast and folks you've talked to in the space come from a creative background, you know, and it tends to start there. And unfortunately now we have, you know, this broader association of NFTs as being a bad word, a bad acronym. And it comes from a fundamental misunderstanding of the technology, which is so much broader than a cartoon JPEG, that might cost a couple $100,000, because that just leads to people, wondering what is going on. You have a 8-bit CryptoPunk that goes for, half a mil, and people are like, I don't get it. Of course they don't get it. Because that's not, that's not what it is, but it's just fascinating. That's where it starts.
To kind of lean into Mo's pragmatism on some of the philosophies he was talking about, like that. And by the way, in California, that analogy took a second to hit. Optimist always brings an umbrella. I'm like, why would he bring an umbrella? Oh, right, it rains places.
It's an English quote. It's a former Prime Minister of the UK used to say it.
That makes a lot of sense. I figure UK or Seattle,
That's where I am.
Oh, there you go.
Although no one in the Pacific Northwest carries an umbrella. It's like if you see someone carrying an umbrella, they're a tourist.
This is a total side tangent, but my buddy moved to Detroit, and he's California boy, born and raised. First time it snows, he brought an umbrella with him, and everybody teased him for it. And he's like, well, it falls from the sky, right? Like, not trying to get wet. They're like, no, you just let it fall on you, man. Like,
look, I just want to kind of like lean into that creative thing.
Mm-hmm.
I've had the immense honor throughout my career of running a lot of creative teams, and I think one of the things that is true about all creatives, and this is true regardless of the medium, right? Whether you're talking about filmmakers, whether you're talking about sculptors, whether you're talking about poets, you name it. Anyone, like even technologists, right? Like people who are building apps are, to my mind, not just technologists, they're creatives. But I think that fundamentally the act of being a creative is based on seeing that there's something wrong with the world. And what I mean by that is, if you think the world is perfect, if you think that things are good, there's no impulse to be creative, right? Because everything's already here, right? The act of being creative involves on some level this internal decision or idea or perspective that the world could be made better by doing X, Y, or Z, right?
There's something missing. There's something
this
needs
painting
to be
that I'm going to do is going to add, it's going to add a narrative into the world. It's going to say something that's different. It's going to give a different perspective. This book that I'm going to write, this app that I'm going to create. I think that there's fundamentally a core kind of understanding of a problem of some kind, right? And that problem may be really small, and it might be really big, right? But fundamentally, you're trying to change something in the world. That is part of being a creative. And I think that that's why you end up with people who are looking at new technologies, new ways of telling stories, new ways of quote unquote changing the world. You see a lot of that out of the creative class because, like, fundamentally creatives are pissy, dissatisfied people, right? Like they're trying, and I say that with love.
No, of course, right? Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding.
Well, I think I think that's part of it for sure. Like, I think that I love that you touch on that the creatives like see problems in the world or see something missing that they need to fill with their expression. But I think there's another piece of this too, which is like with the tools that we're talking about when we're talking about like NFTs, like the ability to certify ownership and the existence of this one digital asset. When we're talking about artificial intelligence, being able to automate certain skill sets and certain things that we can do. And then the metaverse is really an experience, right? It's like a virtual or augmented experience to our reality. And all of those things, I think, are moving society in a direction where we spend less and less time on non-creative things, and we pass that to the technology and let the technology create leverage and automate a lot of the non-creative stuff. And it opens up more doors for where humans spend their time. There's a conversation I was having back in college that still sticks with me to this day, where we were talking about the statistics on like what does a typical child want to do when they grow up. And almost nobody says accountant, even if they're great at math and like could be an amazing accountant someday, and they end up going down that path. Like it always comes down to like, I want to be a musician, or like I want to be an astronaut, or I want to be a doctor, maybe I want to be a healer. Like, but usually there's some sort of creative goal in there somewhere when we're children. And I think that with technology advancing and automating some of those like must-have parts of the world to keep the world running, it also just opens up more creative opportunities for more of our roles to be kind of monetized, paid jobs for creatives.
So if I can just very, very, very quickly defend accountants, which is to say that, no, I'm being very serious. I'm not trying to be flip. Like some of the best business partners that I've ever had are accountants, right? Like fundamentally, right?
And we need those people, right? Like I'm not trying to.
Well, but
speak
like I
negatively
just
of
want to
it.
be like really clear that there is creativity and insight in just about everything, right? Like my core group of leaders at Freeman included a finance partner who was absolutely critical, and I don't mean in a mechanical sense to running the business, but in terms of like giving true insight and bringing a different kind of creativity to the table in terms of running and optimizing the business, right? I just want to kind of get that out there. Sorry, excuse the aside.
No. That's important that you say that though, because like there's a great book that I haven't read the whole thing, but the concept itself I think carries weight, and it's called Eulers' Fabulous Formula. And Euler's formula is seen in the math community as like this art form, essentially, like this masterpiece where you're combining the concepts of like imaginary numbers and pi and zero and all these different concepts into an equation that holds true. And that might be a very technical mathematical concept, but there's beauty in it. And this whole book is about
100%.
the concept that there's beauty in that discovery and that's actually art.
I would posit that mathematics is probably the closest thing to a natural beauty that exists in the world, right? And defines fundamentally everything in the universe. And I know I'm being like hyper esoteric here, but like, yeah. Anyway, sorry. Sorry, that was starting to go down like it's about to turn into an Animal House scene of like,
Yeah,
so you're saying,
This is the risk with long form podcasts, and I do it intentionally because I think whenever you have a long form conversation, it opens up more gold nuggets that you wouldn't find if you're too hyper processed into like a quick little 5-minute question answer session.
Yeah.
But the risk is like we're gonna go on a couple tangents. We're gonna have a couple like, wait, let's dive into this idea real quick. But kind of taking it back to what we were talking about before, like let's zoom out a little bit and give people a little context for what Gen City is, because I think we know a little bit about each of you and your backgrounds, but what actually is Gen City? Is it a technology platform? Is it an agency? Is it both?
So, like, look, structurally, we're in early days, right? Like, and we're in the process of defining who and what we are, right? And a lot of that has to do with intentionality, right? Like we've been very disciplined about having conversations of designing the kind of place we want to be, right? So there's a natural kind of organic thing that happens when you bring a group of people together and start working on stuff and, hey, we're going to do this. I think the beauty of that, right, like is you can go into like really unexpected places, but the danger of that as well is you can end up, going down a dead end, right? And I think that a lot of the conversations that Koa, myself, and the rest of the leaders at Gen City, MK, who heads up our marketing, Rish, who runs technology, and Mike, and others in the organization, a lot of the conversations that we're having are about defining our path in the way that we appear in the world and how we engage with the world, but also keeping enough space for kind of that serendipity and that openness and the ability to kind of explore. Structurally, we think of ourselves as three different things. There's a core kind of services group, and that group is engaging with clients to help them with all kinds of technology needs, right? So some of those may be very Web 2. Some of those may have nothing to do with the web at all, just be kind of technological digital installations at a real live kind of event of some kind.
Super
But
Bowl,
really,
US Open,
yeah,
those
like
types
really connecting with clients around needs that they have that can be solved with the application of technology, however that might be. We obviously have a focus on Web3 and a lot of expertise in Web3, having rolled out our own and really kind of understanding the space at a deep kind of internal level. But that's kind of our service arm. You've also got GCL writ large, which is working on a platform and a set of tools that can help marketers kind of go into the Web3 space. We're still in a lot of kind of, we're not even at beta, we're not even at alpha, right? Like we're really playing with understanding the space and what's possible and what isn't and what makes sense and what drives value. And then there's an innovation group that is really looking at how do you leverage technology to extend stories, right? Tell stories in different ways, help clients tell different kinds of stories, help end users tell different kinds of stories, and engage with the world in different kinds of ways. And that, on some level, a good way to describe it might be a little bit of a skunk works.
And when you say that, just to clarify, so kind of what I'm hearing, and I could be wrong, is sure. That's like kind of like your own NFT project as an example. That lab is like Gen City owned projects, initiatives, experiments, things that you're doing for you to learn more.
Look, I will tell you, like, one of the greatest things in my career was getting to work at Industrial Light and Magic in the mid '90s to the early aughts, and what was really amazing about that space and time for me was kind of working with a group of people who were very focused on telling stories and leveraging technology to tell those stories, but understanding that fundamentally the story is more important than the technology, right? Like what you're trying to do, what you're trying to show, what you're trying to tell is more important than how you do it. And that when you come at it from that perspective, it allows you to kind of experiment with how to tell it, right? Like, is it better to build a CG thing? Is it better to do a model? Is it better to do a puppet? Like, whatever the heck it is, whatever tells the story best. And I think that fundamentally is the perspective that, at least for me, that I'm trying to bring into our innovation space, which is like worry less about the technology and worry more about the value, worry more about what you're able to create in the world. And if that's Web3, great. And if that's Web2, fine. Like, it doesn't really matter. Look, Web3 is not a flag that you just get to wave to solve every problem, right? You want to, it's another protocol, it's another approach to thinking about the world that we believe is going to be the dominant one in the future. But until that gains adoption, until that kind of becomes more mainstream, there's a lot of ways of doing things, and we want to always be honest brokers around the technology, if that makes sense.
So kind of repeating an admiration or something I expressed in the very beginning in your intros, like that's a very important mindset to have, right? Like a lot of people that criticize the blockchain and criticize Web3 will call it a solution without a problem. That's the biggest one I always hear of the anti-crypto beating of the drum. And so because you're so pragmatic about this and you're still believers, I'd be really curious to hear your take on when is the blockchain valuable? So when you're talking to a brand, sometimes Web2 technologies are a better path to take to tell their story, but what are examples of why a brand should lean into Web3 for a particular campaign or typical type of brand?
I think I can jump in on this one. I first wanted to preface what I'm about to say with Mo. You had asked Ricky earlier, what inspired me to go from contractor to full time, and the team. So I would have characterized myself as a bit of a, proof of work protocol, decentralization maxi, up until quite recently, actually. I've learned a lot from this team, and thinking a little bit differently about the the problem is more important than the solution you apply to it. Mo just did a great job sort of articulating. I love the way you described Gen City Labs, sort of had a de-emphasis of the vernacular of blockchain Web3. Like ultimately, you know, find a problem and solve it. There are many ways to do it. Web3 blockchain is yet another tool in your chest, right, in your belt to try to solve it. So your question of when is Web3 an appropriate solution to especially like a brand problem? And fundamentally, you know, we've been dealing with databases our whole lives, mostly private databases. Our banking is on a private database. Our our ownership of the things that we own are stored on separate, siloed, private databases. Our whole lives are governed by databases. A blockchain is just another database. The difference is it's public. It's not stored on a server that is privately owned where the leadership team could, swap out and make different decisions. The content we create on our social platforms, Twitter, LinkedIn, etc., are all stored on siloed private databases. Blockchain is just a public version of that. Everybody holds a copy of this database. And there's a consensus that says we all have the same copy. So where would a public version be appropriate for a brand? And to me, the answer lies in ownership, provable ownership. So, the aesthetic and psychological experience of owning something that's provable that I could sell at some point is a totally different experience than being on an email newsletter for a brand that I am involved in, right? So I applaud the efforts that, say, Starbucks has made with their Odyssey program. I think that's a really awesome example of applying a public database solution that has provable ownership applied, while removing and abstracting all of the technology layer itself. Most folks that are using that program, it's still in beta right now. There's some early adopters that understand and have been in the space for a bit, but I would say most have no idea that they are, playing with a blockchain technology, and that's wonderful. And while, 2022 me would have been incensed by that, 2023 me fundamentally has grown to understand that it doesn't really matter, that the person doesn't quite understand what they're doing. It doesn't quite they don't necessarily know that there's an ethos of ownership and self-custody in Web3. None of that matters. A quote that I've heard from Punk 6529, which I love, I think he's one of my favorite philosophers in the space, is that nobody said at the beginning of Instagram, said, hey, come check out this cool social platform. It was built using Python. It doesn't matter. The technology, fundamentally, the solution that you apply doesn't matter as long as it solves a problem. And so, yeah, I know that was a long-winded answer to your question of why would a brand want to adopt this technology? And I think there's something about that aesthetic experience of having skin in the game, of owning something, and fundamentally being able to sell it, and creating markets where markets hadn't existed before. And I think for a brand, finding your people, finding your brand community, finding your network, finding your customers, that's a amorphous, ever-changing thing. And the ability to sort of take a piece of that and say, I own this piece of this community. If I am, for whatever reason, no longer interested, I could sell it to somebody who is interested. And so I think it's a really interesting layer to apply, a way to keep track in some ways of a moving target. And that's your customer base. That's your community, your brand community.
So there's a couple of things in there that I love that you state. So one is the demystification of blockchain a little bit, and just reminding people what it really is, which is essentially a public-facing database. I think that is an important one that a lot of folks in the business world don't take the time to really just take a breath and simplify it. It's kind of like with the metaverse and extended reality, a lot of folks that criticize it would say it's just gaming. And as someone who's an evangelist of it and leans into it, I'd say, yeah, you're right. So what? Like, it's still just finding a new use case, and it's valuable in the business world too for different things. Why do we care if it's just gaming? All we should care about is whether it's engaging and solving a problem. So I love that you state that. The other thing is the Starbucks example is probably the best example that I've seen. I'd love for the world to get 2, 3, 4 more of those. I think we're in desperate need of that for this space to continue kind of moving in the right direction. But the thing with the Starbucks example, that just kind of playing the role of the skeptic for a second, that I think about, because the good piece of it is that you're right. It gives your community more ownership. A customer can own a moment or a memory. It also adds a new market. It monetizes this idea of status, similar to like finding a like piece of memorabilia for a brand in the 50s. It gives you a similar memory of a deal or a campaign that they run digitally. Now, to play the skeptic, why does someone need that to live on the blockchain versus having their email or another way of verifying that it's on their account or their ownership? Like, what is the value of taking that away from the silo and having it public facing? Like, why is that important to a customer, not to us as people working in the industry?
So if I can just jump in quickly, I think that, part of the problem of being optimistic about a technology or evangelistic about a technology is that you can find yourself in some tunnel vision around why it's correct. And I think a really good example of that, and sorry, I'm dating myself here because you guys are both young gentlemen and I am not. But like back in the early days of video, right? The options were beta or VHS, right? I will tell you,
I'm plenty old enough to remember the beta VHS debates.
I remember rewinding VHS tapes as a kid.
I remember rewinding.
I made mixtapes on cassette too. Okay.
Nice. Yeah.
Isn't that crazy? That's where a mixtape comes from. The fact that people actually splice them together, like.
Yeah.
Dude, I remember recording songs from the radio, and you'd sit there to like cut off the DJ, and like when they talked over the intro,
Totally.
you're like, ugh, shut up, dude.
Yeah, I'm dating myself in the other direction, but I always just had flash drives.
See,
man.
there you go, Ricky. You're exactly my point. But like, no, but my point is that objectively speaking, beta was better than VHS. Right?
Yes.
And it was a better format. It had better image fidelity. Like for all the quote unquote things that tech people thought, right? Like it was not close between beta and VHS. Fundamentally, the difference was that beta was a system that made it very hard for porn to be recorded onto beta, and pornography drove mass adoption, right? Like, and as stupid as that sounds, the worse technology won because the worse technology solved a user use case better, right? And I think that that's the danger a lot in being an evangelist around a technology, right? And I think that it's really important to address things from the standpoint of what does this solve, right? I see a lot of, I remember Web 1.0, right? And I lived in San Francisco at the time and had a lot of friends who were leaving to go into startup land and work at these companies. And I got a million pitches about why I should leave and go join this company that was going to change the world for X, Y, or Z reason. What was true then was that there was a lot of incredibly dumb shit being done in Web 1, right? All of that incredibly dumb shit was really important to do and to fail at or succeed at. They were experiments fundamentally that, through failure or success began to define what Web 1 was going to be. The same thing happened in Web 2, right? There's a lot of really dumb ideas for social networks and publishing networks, and our history is littered with platforms that no longer exist, right? That were the best idea ever at the time. And all of those failures and successes really define the world of Web 2. I think we're in a similar space in Web 3. I think there's a lot of incredibly dumb shit that's being done in Web 3 where you kind of look at it and go, I have no idea why you're attaching a blockchain to this, or why you're approaching it from this way. But like, whatever. Like, I'm not here to yuck your yum, and it'll be interesting to see what happens with it, right?
So sorry, but just taking it back to the question, because I think this is one that's worth kind of sitting and
Sure.
trying to answer for. Because again, as someone who's like heavily involved in the space, I own NFTs, have like experimented a lot with this stuff. I would say I'm more progressive than most people. I'm still getting stuck on this thought all the time, and so getting your take on it, I think, would be valuable for people. Is this idea of digital ownership makes sense to me philosophically, but why it needs to be decentralized versus attached to an email or a user account when it's in the case of business, when it's in the case of something like the Starbucks loyalty program or something like that. I'm still struggling, because every time someone talks about launching a loyalty program, the first complaint is the user experience, and how do I remove the need for a wallet? Maybe it's a custodial wallet, maybe it's some sort of sign-in, so that it's more traditional, more Web 2 style, but lives on the blockchain somehow. And so I guess to me, the custodial wallet or the email kind of defeats the purpose of it living on the blockchain. And so I wonder why a loyalty program would benefit from it.
I agree. I feel like the custodial wallet is a crutch. The custodial wallet is our training wheels to get a taste of self-custody when you don't actually have it. It's a familiar experience, right? Like our bank accounts, we're just used to not custodying our own assets, right? We're used to, you might have a Charles Schwab, a Fidelity account for your retirement or your portfolio of stocks and whatever you have. That's all stored somewhere else, and you trust a third party with that. This whole idea of self-custody is totally new. And look, I wanted to say, like, not everything belongs in a public record. There are so many issues of privacy. NFT ticketing is a great example. Like, we've talked about it a lot internally, Mo. Like, there was we talked with a guy from Live Nation while we were in New York, and he's on the sort of the leadership team, and his take on NFT ticketing is fascinating, and I can't dispute it. Like, knowing the exact location of tens of thousands of people on a public record is a potential privacy concern, right? So I just wanted to point out, like, I hear you. Like, so getting back to the Starbucks thing, right? Why do you need a public record of the ownership of these things? It's a bit loose, and I think we're sort of early and we're experimenting, and they're just trying to dip their toe in. And I sort of applaud them for taking a risk, frankly. I think that's kind of cool. But the risk of a privately stored record of the ownership of these things is that terms and conditions can change. Leadership can come in and change those terms and conditions that apply to the ownership of your thing. Now, those things only have value to the people that hold them and others that want to buy them, right? And I'm a believer of free markets, and I think, anything that can be tokenized and, bought and sold, I think is good. I think it creates, meaningful exchange. And if you have a way to sort of securely do that without having to trust the other party, I think that's fantastic. And, provenance of a thing and following, the ownership change hands. I love all of that part of the technology. So the Starbucks thing, number one, I've been involved in the beta, but I'm not like, I'm gonna just be totally honest. I don't necessarily drink a lot of Starbucks coffee. So I don't like, I haven't actually collected any of the badges. Unlike Mo, who he's a he lives in Seattle. Of course, he's a Starbucks fan.
Oh, you've
But
got one of the good ones there, right? Like the
yeah,
star, like
the original.
high-end Starbucks or whatever.
Totally. That's different than what I'm used to, where like there's like, teenagers, making my drinks too hot. And I'm a bit of a coffee snob when it comes to that. But like, I, long story short, like the ownership of these the assets, you know, having it live in the public means that I'm not necessarily subject to the risks of, changes to policies and decisions of the
So I
people
think
that run the database.
so I think from what I'm hearing, because it's hard, right? Like
Yeah.
it's pretty
Nuanced.
hard to explain the value of it, and so that's part of where I get hung up, right? So I think there's a few things I do see genuine value in. One is showing status.
Yeah.
So when you can say publicly, I own this, and it's like definitely verified that it is this, and that's public, that's cool. And
Yeah.
you can see the history of where it comes from and the transfer and all of that. Like I think the public showing of ownership for status reasons, and that's where something like Damien Hirst's experiment with the currency
Perfect.
in art.
Great
I think
example.
those are very interesting examples of where this can go. The second one is when transfer of ownership makes a difference. So like if art is being resold repeatedly and being able to give a chunk of that back to the original artist when it goes up 10x, 100x, 1000x in value, that's super interesting to me. And having that publicly verifiable so someone can't hide it is needed to protect the artist and make sure that they're getting their piece of it. So there's things like that where I do see the value in it. But when it comes to the business perspective and like marketers, the only one that keeps hitting home for me is less about the technology and it's more about the emotional kind of like community reaction, the social behavior that we've seen happen with NFTs in the last couple of years, where all of a sudden you're finding ways to get tens of thousands of people engaged in an active conversation where they're participating in Twitter Spaces and in real life events like NFT NYC, which we haven't even talked about yet. And like getting people excited because they feel this sense of ownership over that thing. And this is something that Web2 brands, the best ones, have done a great job of, right? Like I always use this example of a meme that went viral on LinkedIn, funny enough, where someone made a fake resume saying I worked at Apple, worked at Netflix, worked wherever, but really they just helped their grandma learn how to use their iPhone, or they like helped other people get access to streaming things on Netflix or whatever. And it's a meme and it's hilarious, but it's also such a great shifting in perspective of how we think of our customers, because the reality is they're more than a customer. Like they're giving us feedback on our product so we can build better products. They're evangelizing us to their friends so that we can get more customers. They're training other people on our products so that other people can learn how to adopt them. And I think as a business, if you're looking to build a brand, that shift of perspective, that community forward mindset, that is like one of the best things we can learn from this whole Web3 movement, regardless of whether you use the technology for it or not. And I heard you guys talk a lot about this same idea of this community forward thinking. And so I wonder what advice you have for brands on like how to do it right and things that they might want to try and avoid as they try and shift into community building or thinking of their customers more like a community.
I would say this. It's critical that people are authentic, and it's critical that people look at the user and add value. It's really that simple, right? Like everything you just described, all these conversations about whether there's a use for blockchain in this case or that case or whatever, where it matters is where you are creating value, and where it doesn't matter is where you're not creating value, right? But like, I love what Starbucks is doing with Odyssey. I think it's really great. I think it's really smart. All of those things. I'll be honest, there's zero need for the blockchain in terms of the Odyssey experience, right? They've they've created a cool little fun thing, and there's a secondary market in terms of the badges that you can buy, and it's kind of cool. Hey, I got this badge and now it's worth $44 or whatever the heck, and I only had to buy 2 coffees to do it, right? Like, and it's a really interesting little on-ramp into Web3. But fundamentally, I don't think that anybody engaged in that Odyssey process is going to come out of it and go like, this Web3 thing is really interesting. I should, dig into it more. I think the use cases that you threw out around blockchain are really good ones, right? Like status, provenance, those kinds of things where a publicly verifiable, or not even publicly verifiable, right? Like, because you can have private chains, right? Like, but a verifiable, chain of custody, a verifiable chain of status, right? That can exist for people to be able to audit or refer back to. I think there's a lot of other use cases, right? I think education is a great one, right? Certifications, right? Especially in highly regulated industries, right? When you are an anesthesiologist and there are certain levels of credits that you have to do in order to, maintain your certifications or, those kinds of learnings, having a way for hospitals to check that, hey, you're up to date on all of your stuff, you're current in a way that is non-fakeable. Right?
That's a really interesting use case, and I don't expect you to have this answer prepared,
Sure.
because I'm just thinking of it as more of like a question for the audience or a question for myself later. I just want to quantify that problem, because I think that's a very valid thing of like, okay, like the LinkedIn, can we get soul-bound tokens or whatever to like have something where you have a certification of the jobs you've held or the school certificates that you say that you have for highly regulated industries, to your point, like medicine or like industrial jobs and things like that, where you need those certifications, you need them renewed. It makes sense. Like, that makes sense to me. But I wonder how real of a problem that is, how big of a problem that is, how much money people are risking, how often lawsuits happen because someone wasn't certified and they did the job anyways. Like, those are questions that I don't have answers, and I don't expect you to have answers to, but those are the questions that go through my mind on what I would want to do to quantify that before saying that's a real problem to solve for.
I don't fundamentally think that it matters, Ricky. And what I mean by that is the size of the problem, to me, in terms of a quantity, is not as important as the fact that you're solving the problem, because I think that as you solve problems, you figure out other problems to solve that become adjacencies, right? One of my favorite authors is William Gibson, right? And he's also just a plug out there to at the Great Dismal, Twitter, like on point, like an amazing guy to follow. But William Gibson's futurism is not about like blue sky, like, woo, I just came up with a world where there's unicorns and whatever. He defines an adjacent future, right? Like, it's not a far off reality. It's something like where you look at it and go, I could see that happening. And the freaky thing for somebody who's been reading Neuromancer since I was in high school and college and whatever, is seeing a lot of stuff from these books that were written 30 years ago come to life today. I think there's a lot of emphasis on solving big problems that makes moving technology forward hard. And I think it's important to focus on small problems, right? And let the technology lead you to where it's going to go. I think the Betamax versus VHS argument continues to hold here, right? Like, one team focused on solving technological challenges and another team focused on a really dumb problem, which is like, how do I get to look at naked people, right? In the privacy of my own home, right? Luckily, that was a financially viable option, but the point I'm trying to make is it's not always the sexy problems that you solve.
That's kind of ironic, given the metaphor.
That's true. I'm not sure it's ironic because there are a few things less sexy than porn, but that's just a personal take. But what I'm trying to get at though is I think that we can sometimes get captivated by the big problem and ignore the small problems. And I think that sometimes solving for the small problems gets you further faster because you're able to solve things and learn quickly and iterate forward into something that actually makes sense, right? One of my personal mentors and frankly an idol even before I met him and got the chance to work with him is this incredible designer and just like mind-blowingly brilliant and compassionate human being called Bruce Mao. And one of the things that he's said to me over and over again is he's never had a client come to him with a problem. They always come to him with a solution, right? Like they come to him and go, Bruce, we need to do a rebrand for our company, or we need to do it. And his argument is like, that's the perfect place to stop and to say like, okay, before we decide to do a rebrand, and I'm not saying that we don't need to do a rebrand, can we understand why you need to do a rebrand, right? Let's step back and truly understand the problem. And I think that the adoption of Web3 is going to be based on solving small problems, not big ones, right? I think...
or porn.
Or porn. No, but look, Koa and I have had this conversation.
By the way, I'm Koa. He's been calling me Koa.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
sorry.
I think I saw on your email. Is that like your tag for like Discord and Twitter?
Yeah,
and
that's we can talk about that a little later. That's my my digital
character.
Identity. My character.
I kind of figured it was tied into that.
Apologies for everyone.
No worries. Yeah,
Eric is Koa. Yeah. No, but like one of the conversations that we've had a lot really is about kind of a philosophical conversation around crypto and specifically kind of blockchain, right? Banking begins, and I'm talking about like way the fuck back. Sorry, you now have an explicit tag, but like way back in the Middle Ages when people are trying to move money, right? So I'm in Milan and I need to go to Rome and I need to pay for something in Rome, but the notion of like traveling with 12 bags of gold on these roads where there's thieves and bandits and all this other shit is scary to me. So I go to a banker in Milan and he gives me a piece of paper and I give him my money, and that piece of paper goes to a banker in Rome and that guy gives me gold, based on the value that I gave to the guy in Milan minus a service charge. Fundamentally, banking is around the mitigation of risk, right? That's why it begins, right? It's not because people were like, oh, this is a great product for tracking financial transactions. It's like, I don't want my shit to get stolen. So I'm going to figure out a way to theoretically transport money, right, through the use of a piece of paper that becomes a symbolic transfer of money from Milan to Rome, right? That turns into our banking system, right? And that very simple paper transaction turns into like all kinds of innovations, right? Which, at the last housing crisis with like, tranches of like collateralized debt and like,
mortgage securities.
Yeah, whatever, right? Like it starts with solving a very simple problem. I'm trying to get my money to Rome, right? And you end up with innovation in the space, and sometimes that innovation is fucking insane, and sometimes that innovation helps people get into homes and start businesses and do all this other stuff. I think the exact same thing is happening with crypto, and that's the problem that needs to be answered in crypto, which is how do I mitigate risk? Because people are naturally risk averse for the most part, right? Like that is the genetic trait that gets passed from generation to generation, is risk aversion to some extent, which is what what allows your lineage to continue, right? And I'm being a little kind of woo-woo here, right? But that fundamentally exists in crypto as well. Like we have to solve a risk aversion problem, right? I think crypto sounded like a really great idea to a lot of people, and then FTX, the FTX stuff started happening, and there was a whole lot of people going like, "Whoa, I thought this was safer."
Yeah, and
Like, what the fuck happened here? And once again, like, I think that there was a lot of quote unquote innovation that was happening in that space, right? That may not have been good innovation, right?
Well, the irony is FTX isn't decentralized, right? Like FTX is a centralized exchange, and I think a lot of people see that as this huge anti-crypto moment versus for me, as someone who's like already skeptical about crypto in my own ways, saw that as a reason why decentralization matters, is because you trusted the wrong person and then you get screwed over. But
I 100% agree with you. Sorry, like, I don't mean to interrupt you. I 100% agree with you, but I want to be very clear about the difference between reality and perception.
Yes, yeah.
Right? Like, I'm not saying that that's the reality of FTX.
But that was the
I'm
reaction.
saying that
that was definitely
the reaction of FTX was like, "Whoa, what the fuck? Like, you told me to put all my money in crypto, nephew, and like, f this shit, right? Like, I'm going back into T-bills, right?"
Yeah. Well, then Larry David gets sued. It's a whole thing. But
right.
The metaphor I always like to throw out there when talking about decentralization versus centralization. Let's remove technology, or at least modern technology. Let's say the internet doesn't exist. Let's go back a couple thousand years. We still weren't decentralized when we lived in society. If I want to make a sword, I'm going to go find a blacksmith. I'm not going to master blacksmithery if I'm a baker. Like, if I want bread, I'm going to go find a baker. If I want farming, I'm going to go find a farmer, right? Like we have different skills and personalities and things that we master. And society moves further by allowing some people to become engineers and other people to become marketers, and like having people lean into their skills and offer their value to society, and then sharing in that in some way. Now, how we organize that is called government, and it's a little bit messy, especially the bigger the government gets and the bigger the people they have to organize. But where I personally have fallen for some crypto scams, I think it's almost like a rite of passage. If you're going to dabble in this stuff, you're going to end up losing a little money on a scam at one point. Like, that's part of just playing with new things, is that stuff exists.
Yeah.
And it teaches you how to be more secure and more educated about it. But it made me realize, I'm like, I'm pretty educated on this stuff. I worked for a financial services company. Like, I've had security training on anti-phishing attacks and things like that, right? And I still fell for something. And I was just thinking to myself, like, we cannot expect 7-8 billion people to all be masters of cybersecurity. Like, we just can't. There needs to be some sort of regulation or some sort of third party. And the challenging part, and the reason why we have this philosophy around decentralization in the first place, is who do you trust with that, and how do you put that together in a way that we all agree on? And that's just a messy thing, man. But I think the biggest value from it, from my perspective, with the metaverse and crypto, is I'll use the metaverse analogy because that's more close to me, is it gives us this opportunity to reflect on society in a new way, right? Like, we're building these virtual worlds, we're creating digital twins, and in those worlds, we're now dealing with the same issues of like sexual harassment and implicit biases, and like, how do we build these virtual worlds in a way that are good for everybody, and what is good and what's bad, and these really high level thoughts. And it's kind of removing all of our traditional social norms and all of the things we're all hung up on in the real world that we're just used to being normal, and it's forcing us to challenge our own views of what normal should be. And I think that is a very interesting societal experiment that we're kind of all going through right now, where we have an opportunity to make some really drastic changes to how we operate as a society in the next 3 to 5 years. So that's one of my biggest drivers for why to be involved in it, why to be educated about it. Like, I love that you guys have an innovation lab where you're actually experimenting, because I think a lot of people talk about this stuff and they don't actually open up ChatGPT and type some prompts in. Like, they don't actually go hang out in VR and like jump in these worlds, and I think if we're going to talk about it, if we're going to have these conversations, it's so important to dabble with it, think about it, and like try and process, like, how does this apply to the world? And I don't think enough people are really thinking of it that way. So that's one of my biggest takeaways from talking to you guys, is like, I think you guys are thinking about things in that same kind of way. And I think for y'all, what I'm realizing is it's hard to talk about things at a macro level of like what are the key problems that blockchain solves or something like that. They're harder questions to answer. I think where I could imagine you guys really killing it with helping brands is when you have something isolated of like a brand comes to you and you just start learning about them and you're like, what's your brand do? What are you trying to achieve? And you have that specific use case. I could picture you guys really diving deep into that and like solving some problems for people.
I think the criticality, Ricky, is to understand the problem always, right? And I think that what we try to do is to make sure that we understand all the tools, right? Not to throw out solutions, but to say like, look, I've got a whole pile of tools that I can use, whether that's leveraging blockchain, whether that's Web3, whether that's communities, whether that's Web2, whether that's AR, VR, any of these other kinds of things that are out there. We know how to use all these things. Don't worry about any of those things. Let's talk about what your problem is, right? Like, what is it that you're trying to solve? Brand, community, whatever it may be. What is it that you're trying to solve? And we like to think of ourselves as kind of like honest brokers that can look back at our tool set and go, actually, I know you think you need, Web3, but this might be better for you, or vice versa, right? Like, I know you think you want to do a Web2 solution, but Web3 might actually future-proof you and get you into a better space faster, further, and give you less problems down the road. Once again, I think that, this is the part that people forget about a lot, which is nobody cares about the technology, right? And I don't mean nobody. I mean, the end user doesn't. Look, this is where a background in film for me was incredibly useful, right? Because I studied economics at Berkeley and went into film, which was, kind of goofy. But I came to film without a lot of background in film. And one of the first lessons was realizing just how much stuff that happens right outside of the frame is janky, right? Like, the picture looks perfect and there's like a leaf that's in just the right place, and you realize that leaf is on a C-stand, and someone's slowly like moving it a little bit because there's not actually any wind, and the water's rippling because there's a dude with a fan that's off to the side, and it doesn't matter, because what the user cares about is, oh, I looked at a picture of the lake and there was these beautiful, palm fronds swaying, and then the water was like perfect, right? Like, what you have to do to make it look good on screen is all that matters fundamentally. That's the same approach to solving any of these problems, right? Like, I don't care as an end user if my bank account is on blockchain or on a private database that the bank holds. What I care about is my money is there when I need it and it's safe. That's all I care about, right? Like, if you have a solution that's blockchain based that is, transparent to me, and it's like, great, it's even easier to move money now because I don't have to wait for checks to clear and blah, 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 like all this other stuff. Now you've improved my life with a piece of technology, and I'll be like, great, this bank is Web3. I don't even know what that means, but I get my money faster, right? Like, whatever. That's the point to me. It's not the technology. It's how you leverage the technology to solve the problem. And that fundamentally is what will drive adoption. 10 years from now, nobody will be talking about Web3. It'll just be normal. Like, this will be how we do stuff. This idea of like having verifiable ownership, decentralizing the conversation. Like, our big focus really, right, we think the next big place in a lot of ways is around data. And that is something that Web3 enables in a very different way, which is to say, like, I can own my data, right? And I can engage in a, for lack of a better term, contract with you around how you get to use my data. And I can revoke that, right? Like, there's some interesting thought experiments out there that I've seen around tokenizing securities, right? Which is to say, like, hey, I want to sell shares in my company, but I want to sell them as tokens, right? And those tokens could come with smart contracts that me as a user can say, okay, I will buy shares in this company, but I won't allow you to do X, Y, or Z, right? Like, these are things that are predicates for me owning shares in this company. And that actually starts to get to a much more interesting place as an investor, because like, I own Tesla stock, or I own Apple stock, or whatever it is, and once a year I'll get an email saying like the Apple stockholder meeting is happening or whatever. But like, I'm gonna I'm gonna actually show up for my 6 shares and make a stand for anything. But if you can leverage tokens to drive corporate management, to drive corporate investor oversight in very different ways. And I don't know that that's the right answer. I'm just saying it's an interesting thought experiment for how you can leverage tokens to create, for lack of a better description, something like a DAO, right? Like that's aligned to investment. There's a lot of really interesting use cases, and it's all about the value that they'll drive, whether they succeed or not, in my opinion.
So the first thing I want to call out is you said something really important in there about like we're not going to keep calling it Web3 at some point, and it'll just be the future. I think the easiest evidence for that is whoever used the word Web 1 and Web 2 before we started saying Web 3. Like when you were on Facebook and Instagram.
I remember the Web 2 conversation.
For a second, right? For
yes,
a couple years.
Exactly.
Like,
yeah.
and that's why, like, as I got deeper into the metaverse side of things, like the number one thing I realized is everyone who's interested in it, that's a little older than I am or more experienced than I am, been around a bit, immediately drawing parallels to, I remember starting my first e-commerce store for my company, or like I know some guys that were heavily involved in that with Walmart. Yep. And they were kind of comparing what's happening now to the experience they had moving into merchandising online. And so there's these parallels, right? Like we're kind of repeating some of the same things, and I think we can learn a lot from looking at that pattern of the two. The second thing that I'm noticing, the more we get into this discussion about the value of blockchain and like where it really solves problems versus where it doesn't, it seems like the DeFi side of things is like where it really comes from, first of all, right? Like that's why Bitcoin was invented in the first place. And it feels to me like we're a lot closer to tangible value in the DeFi space with decentralization than we are with the ownership of other forms of assets. I think that's much more experimental at the moment with music and art and the idea 100%. Of loyalty programs. And it's a lot earlier stage. Like this stuff's a few years old versus a couple decades old. So I think that's worth calling out. But I'm also not a DeFi guy. I'm more of like a metaverse experiences creative guy. So I tend to steer myself away from it a little bit.
Bruce Mao, who I mentioned earlier, pointed this out to me, and it's been a lovely framing that I just adore and come back to over and over again. If you go back to the beginning of radio, right? When radio first started, there weren't rules around radio. It was just this it's like, shit, I can talk into a microphone and it travels through the air and my voice or the sound of music or whatever it is appears in somebody's house. But we didn't have rules for the medium. So if you listen to the early days of radio, like they took another art form and just transferred it to radio, right? And that was basically the play.
It was a new channel.
They took plays and performed plays on the radio, and like we've all seen that old archival footage of people like making like weird sounds and coughing and footsteps and all this other stuff to do radio plays. Television comes along and the same thing, but by then there's rules for radio, right? Because radio develops as a medium, and we transfer those rules to TV. But if you look at early TV, like I've done this as someone kind of in media, but you look at early TV, there was no such thing as commercials. They didn't know how to do commercials. So it would be like a talk show and they'd be talking and then the camera would like pan over to the side and there'd be a product on a table and they go, today's show is brought to you by, Eric Arvai Soap Flakes. Eric Arvai Soap Flakes, they're the best soap, like whatever the heck it is. And then it would pan back and go back to this thing because they really hadn't figured out the rules for television, right? At some point, someone had to figure out the rules for a talk show, right? Like there never were talk shows, but like we got to a point where it was like there's always a desk, there's always like people to the right, and there's like, and there's a sidekick, and like all those rules got developed at one point. But there was a wild west of TV when there were no rules, and it was like fucking insane, and people were trying all kinds of insane shit, and then it developed around a set of rules. And then the same thing happened with internet, right? Like I remember when webcasting began, and you looked at a lot of webcasting, and webcasting was like replicating TV. Like people would build like fake talk show sets in their basements, and like, oh, I'm gonna interview so and so who's like the the sheriff of blah blah county, right? But eventually we end up with TikTok videos, right? And there's a whole set of rules and engagements and design around how that medium, that web broadcasting medium works, right? Like 30-second pieces, 60-second pieces, right? There's a set of math around that. We're in that initial space in kind of Web3, right? Like there's no rules, right? There's people doing crazy shit. There's people doing really cool shit. There's people doing worthless shit. And we're going to figure it out. But like 10 years from now, there's just going to be a way that everybody does this stuff in this new medium, right? Like this is how we leverage blockchain. This is how we leverage tokens. This is how we do all this stuff. And there'll be a set of rules. And I guarantee you, like 10, 15 years from now, someone's going to be talking about Web 4 and how Web 3 is like tired and broken and doesn't make any sense. And there's this new paradigm and whatever the hell it is, right? Like change is constant. And you've got to understand that we always steal from the previous thing until we understand the rules of the new medium. So I think that there's a lot of people like Starbucks stealing Web 2 kind of frameworks and putting them on top of Web 3 to see what works and whether that slides people into it. And I'm sure it will. But at a certain point, as we start to approach something like a maturity, there'll be a set of Web 3 standards, a set of crypto standards, a set of NFT standards that people align around. And I think your point about DeFi is a good one. DeFi's been around a little longer than all this other stuff and has started to have rules and approaches and ways that people have standardized kind of the way of thinking about it. That, being open to experimentation is really, to me, all it's about, and being open to looking at even failures to understand how the failures succeeded, right? Internally, right? Like you can still succeed within the context of certain things that you're trying to do, even if the overall project fails.
Yeah, there's I always find two every time. Like I always poke at two things. I just know that about myself. But one thing that comes up as you talk about this is the idea of experimentation is so important. And I talk about this with brands all the time, that like, you definitely don't want to find yourself being the next Blockbuster or the next Sears. And like, that's what's just naturally going to happen down the road if you don't experiment with this stuff. You can't just wait for everyone else to solve the problems, especially if you're a big legacy brand. Because what I'm finding is a lot of the newer brands from the 2000s to the 2010s are actually some of the slowest ones to adopt this new stuff, because they don't feel pressure. They've already disrupted. Like, they're doing so well on Web 2 digital channels because they created them. So this is actually a bigger opportunity for legacy brands like the AT&Ts, the Verizons of the world, like the companies that kind of got leapfrogged out a little bit during these last 20 years. I think they have an opportunity to leverage AI, to leverage the metaverse, to leverage these blockchain programs to become back in the front of relevancy and to remain relevant for the next 50 to 100 years. So that's an interesting thing that I've found just in my conversations. The second thing with this idea of experimentation that I think is so important is that finding good partners to experiment with helps you skip a lot of steps. So just by the nature of us being in the space and being that support system for brands, we're a little biased that outsourcing makes sense. But here's why I think outsourcing makes sense for running these experiments. When you find guys like Mo and Eric, like when you find people that are doing these projects all the time, they have their own innovation lab, they're working with a variety of customers, they learn faster. Like you guys are actually out here working with a variety of different types of projects and brands and solving different problems with the same types of tools. And so you're able to skip a lot of steps. And I listened to a great talk with the former head of product for iHeartRadio and Nate Essen, who's actually episode 1 of the podcast. They were talking about this idea of like, if you're going to launch in Roblox versus launching in Fortnite versus launching whatever metaverse program in whatever virtual world you decide to do it, if you find a partner who's done it in that world before, like there's a ton of terminology and cultural development around the world of Roblox. Like it's just different than Fortnite. Like it's not the same. The type of users you're engaging with are different. The type of games they play in there are different. And having a partner who can help you through that, because they've done it 50 times, 100 times in the last 6 months, it's just going to help you skip a lot of mistakes. There are ways to mitigate risk, even with something so new. And so I'm not trying to be overly salesy with that, but like we are kind of coming up at the end of time. And so it's a great segue into like, hey, if you're going to outsource, these might be some guys worth looking at, and maybe give you guys a chance to plug where people can find you and how to learn more about Gen City.
Eric, you're up.
I'm up. Yeah. Yeah, totally. So, gencitylabs.io. Follow us on LinkedIn, on Twitter, TikTok. And if you're interested in jumping into our lab, our community of NFT holders, it's the Frontierverse on Twitter and TikTok, aka Non-Fungible Heroes. We have a very community storytelling type of engagement where we have heroes and villains and gods. We've got comic books, we've got a game, we've got tokens, we've got all kinds of fun tools that have come out of our playground, our lab, that are super fun to get involved in. We do weekly Twitter Spaces on Tuesday afternoons, 2 o'clock Pacific. And I think we're going to do a bunch more LinkedIn events as well on a regular basis. And honestly, Ricky, this has been such a fun conversation. We'd love to have you on and on a future one of those. So I think that'd be super fun and hear more about what you're doing and what you're building. You were so gracious to have us on. So I really appreciate the time.
Yeah, I'd love to, guys. I really, really enjoyed the LinkedIn Live I listened to. And that's a new thing, right? Like I've wanted LinkedIn to get that Twitter Spaces energy going for a long time. And
totally.
Yours is one of the first couple of those conversations I've jumped in on. And it felt really good because you just get a different type of community listening in on it. Like LinkedIn just attracts a different audience. Yeah. And also, I'm a holder of one of these NFTs too.
A lot less Nazis on LinkedIn.
Right.
Very true. LinkedIn's an underrated platform. I think there's a lot of people producing great content. People just need to lean into it a little bit more. I think that the interesting thing about LinkedIn is that Gen Z and like younger millennials are just kind of reaching that point where their career is becoming more and more important to them.
Yep.
And so people that are social natives, like grown up on social media, are just now getting to a point where that platform is more attractive to them, I think. So exciting stuff, guys. This was an amazing conversation. That's the pod.